So if we don't have control, then how can we possibly have confidence in anything? Where do we actually get confidence if we can't be confident in what's going on around us to stay the same? Because it won't. Nothing around us will stay the same. Mm-hmm. Life is constant change. So how do we find real confidence in that? And for me, it's we build trust in ourselves, in our ability to respond.
This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte.
Identifying your blocks and demystifying your struggles
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art.
Okay. Growing into real confidence. This is, I feel like there's been a number of episodes that we've done, Brandon, over the last little while, where it seems like the topic that we're getting into, the subject matter that we're getting into, is something that, like, have we not really discussed this before? And sometimes there are things that we've discussed in the peripheral, because they're related to other subjects, but I don't know if we've ever really talked about, confidence, this thing of confidence, something that we, that many people struggle with, that many artists struggle with, but just people in general, we struggle with confidence very often. We all want to be confident. We all want to feel confident, but that can be tough sometimes. And as we discovered a little bit in our pre-chat to this podcast, there can be this kind of journey, this evolution, this, as we said, this growth, this growing into real confidence that is a very important one. That's a more genuine kind of confidence, but that perhaps in a way that means having our first experiences of confidence being shaken up a little bit. And so I'll just hand it off to you. Brandon, what have you got to set the table on this one?
Yeah, well, okay. I would say that I think a couple of important things to mention here as we get into this one is that when you're young and you're confident, maybe I'll use an example because I was talking to you about this when we were just chatting on our way into this conversation. If you're a little kid, you look at a little kid, they're usually actually pretty confident. They're running around, they're being pretty reckless. And then
especially creatively, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Creatively, kids are quite confident.
Yeah, they are. And they, and then all of a sudden they trip or they fall or they bang, they bang something, they hurt themselves. And then, it's like when you see a kid hurt themselves for the first time, they like almost don't even know what happened. They like don't even know how to respond to it. They're like, like stunned, right? And then depending usually on the parent's response, the caretaker's response, they have a response. They don't know necessarily what to do in response to what's just happened. And so the confidence that they had just got shook a little bit. It got a little bit rattled because now they experience pain. And when you experience pain, you go, oh, well, that can happen. I can experience pain. I can, something bad can happen. So naturally, as a human being, your response is like, okay, well, I need to be careful of that. I need to watch out. Bad thing could happen. Pain could happen. And so your confidence can get a little bit rattled or a little bit shook. Now take this into the adult world. You get into a relationship. You put your total heart into it. You just fall in love head over heels with this person, and they betray you, or they just break your heart. They do something really, really difficult. And you go, wow, I can have my heart broken. The confidence you had to let yourself go, to fall in love, all of a sudden now you're maybe not as willing, right? A lot of people aren't. And so this is what I think we're talking about in the early stages of like that you had confidence before you knew what pain was possible. And then pain happens. And then you're in that next stage. Okay, do you want to rebuild? Do you actually want to be confident? Do you still want to go for these things you want in life, knowing that this pain is possible? And that's, I think that's where we're talking about. That's the territory. We're talking about growing into this real confidence where you can, knowing what pain is possible, knowing what could go wrong, and finding the ability in yourself to be like, I will be okay. I will be able to respond to this. And I'm not having confidence from a kind of an arrogance, reckless place, but from a mindful, conscious, courageous place. And that second one, it comes with a whole series of challenges. And that's what most of us, I think, as adults are dealing with. And you mentioned something before we started this podcast, which I'll just throw this into the mix while we're here, how a lot of people, as they become adults, they actually don't rebuild confidence at all. They just avoid. And I think we want to confront that issue as well, because, you know, a lot, like they say that the one thing standing between you and your dreams is fear. And I would say that fear and confidence, oh man, they're two rivals that go head to head very often. But somehow you have to manage to have courage and confidence, which is have fear but rise above fear. And that's where confidence really exists. But that's difficult, to get the courage to, you know, to know that you can make it through the pain maybe again, right?
Mm-hmm. And I would think that, like, in many ways, courage is in the way in which we're going into this particular conversation, I think to me has a lot to do with trust. Like the amount of courage that we have, I think a lot of the times boils down to the amount of trust that we have in ourselves. I don't know if I guess we're here, so maybe we'll just dive into this part of the conversation. There were so many things that you said that I was just like, oh, we could talk about this thing and that thing and go. There's a lot of aspects to this. Well, first off, I want to say that because I can hear maybe some people out there being like, well, kids aren't necessarily confident. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, you definitely, there are kids that you meet and they seem to lack confidence in certain respects. But I think in general, like most kids, they have this sort of, this kind of way of being and because I think that for the most part, I agree with you, Brandon, like until there's a pain point that happens, that comes about. And, you know, there's, that metaphor of, you know, like an actual physical pain, kids are playing and stumbles and falls or whatever. But there's also this thing that, I think it's Elizabeth Gilbert, and what does she call it? It's like kind of like this creative wound. And sometimes it's something that, a lot of artists and creative types of people or people who feel called to do something like that, have to come to terms with or have to confront at some point in time, because very often a lot of people have had their creativity stomped out by somebody, and that's another pain point as well. You know, like something that you were actually did have a gift at or skill at or talent for, and someone, you know, usually important to you, close to you, a parent or a teacher or something, is dismissive of the thing that you did, or they don't understand what you did. And so it's just, it doesn't get nurtured. And that's a very painful thing, for people to go through. And so you lose confidence in something that's actually, something that you actually have a talent for. So there's a number of different kinds of wounds and pains that can happen that can destroy our confidence going forward into something. So I think that I just wanted to address that aspect of it as well. But I do think that there is something to this this childhood thing. And yeah, and as we become adults, there can be this sort of buildup, I think, of all of these different ways in which our confidence has taken a hit. And I think that so much of what we're talking about is our response to these things. And sometimes I think, I mean, man, I feel like we've got so much ground to cover with this conversation that I'm like, don't know exactly what the best way to the next best place to go into. But I think as we've been discovering, is that where our confidence is coming from. Whereas early on, our confidence can kind of come from ignorance, and even a little bit of a recklessness. And that's okay for a time, but eventually we sort of have to become a little bit wiser. And I think that is part of where this trust element enters for me. So in terms of bringing this all together, there's this component to which we have a confidence that's a bit naive earlier on. The sort of the child confidence, the childlike confidence, which is very real. I'm not going to say that it isn't confidence, because it is. It is, but it's one that hasn't necessarily been tested. It's one that hasn't been confronted with certain challenges, right? And very often it's like when that challenge gets presented, that's when the confidence can go. I'm trying to segue this one, Brandon. But there's a different kind of confidence that that comes from experience, that comes from knowing, that isn't just sort of a ignorant, reckless, blind kind of a thing, but comes from our ability to trust ourselves in our ability to respond, as opposed to just ignorance. And I guess also, because we were talking about this before we started recording, Brandon, that there's like two different kinds, but it might be kind of three. There might be almost like three steps into this. There's that early, just sort of blind, ignorant, reckless confidence. And then I think that there's this second attempt at confidence, which has to do with control. And then I think that takes a hit, and then it turns into this other type of confidence. So I think that was maybe what was throwing me off here. I'm just trying to make this fit into two boxes here, but I'm like, no, I think there might be three stages that we've identified at this point, in this sort of evolution, in this kind of growth.
Yeah, all right. I can roll with that. I might even throw in that there's a fourth stage, which is the stage of arrogance, which is the stage of, and maybe this is all part of control, maybe this is just the second stage, but it's the fake confidence, is like the act where people are presenting as confidence, but they're not really confident. And that's more for show, and that's more for and to me, arrogance is like when you're trying to get the benefits of confidence without actually having confidence, and it's a house of cards. Arrogance is ultimately a house of cards, because all it needs is to be tested. But I think people can get away with being arrogant because they can avoid ever getting tested, and that's how they do it, right? So they maintain their arrogance by just never putting anything ever under the test. And so then they just skate by kind of like looking like they have it together, but really, if it ever got put under fire, if it ever got put under the test, it would totally just crumble and fall apart. And
Yeah.
like that's what it like. And arrogant people also, like, you can usually see it too. Not always. I'm sure there's some people that are a little more classy about it, but it has this tinge of ego, and it's like you kind of know it because you can see it's a little bit more about them than it should be. Whereas I find with like genuine confidence, people don't tend to try to put the focus on themselves. It's just something I've noticed because when you're confident, a friend told me this actually when we were like teenagers. He said, you know, like, because we used to play soccer at a really high division. And I remember him saying, like, you know, he was mentioning some player that on our team that was talking about how great they were. And he's like, I'd rather show it on the field. And like, to me, that is confidence. Like, if you are really confident, it'll show up on the field. You don't need to talk about it. You'll just be there, and it'll be, and people will talk about it because it was there. But like, when the people who usually have to boast, to me, usually that's a sign that they don't actually have confidence. That at least if they're good at it, they don't believe they're as good as they're putting on. And you can have it's not like you're all I mentioned this too. It's not that you're all arrogant or all confident. You can be a little bit of a mix. You know, you can have like actual real confidence in some areas, but then you're using arrogance to make up for these areas maybe you feel insecure. And so it's not like you're just a totally arrogant person. It's just that we might have arrogance in some little areas that we're just, you know, and sometimes you're arrogant too, not out of ego, but just because it's never been tested. You don't know any better. You think you've been tested, but you've never actually been tested. And then all of a sudden you get tested and you're like, holy shit, I'm not as good as I thought I was. And that can be kind of devastating. But
Yeah.
that person, I think, was still in that almost first stage of naivety with their arrogance. Like, it was like, because like childhood confidence, and I'll just mention this one last thing about this. Childhood confidence is a little bit arrogant because not that like, you don't think of a kid as being arrogant because it's not really what they're doing, but they don't know because it's not been tested. Like, they think they're good. Like, if you ask kids, there's a study they did where they go, if you go into I think it's like a kindergarten class, and you go, how many kids here can paint? Every kid will stick their hand up. How many kids here can sing? Every kid will stick their hand up. And that's kind of more what'll happen. But if you go into a group of adults, maybe one or two or three people, depending on the environment, will stick their hand up for a lot of things. And so it's this kind of, I think what we're really talking about here is like self-perception meets reality data meets actually like being actually being tested in the world with these two things. And then I guess almost the fourth stage is like, then what am I going to do with that? Now that I know that, you know, I'll share one other story, Evan. I think this might give context. I have a friend. He was the star quarterback, I think, of high school. He's American star quarterback, which is a big deal in high school. And he remember we went to college tryouts with all the other quarterbacks from, I guess, the state. And he was like, he came home to his dad and he was just like devastated. He's like, these kids can throw so fast. And he just like couldn't believe how good everyone else was. And it was like, you know, he's like, Kate, well, and his dad talked to him and tried to help him and whatever. It's okay, well, you got to raise your game. But he came in going like, I'm the shit. I'm really great. Yeah. And then all of a sudden he got to see what's out there. And now all of a sudden in context, it's like, wow, maybe I'm not as good as I thought I was. You know what I mean? And it's a different thing when you see it on TV versus when you're on the field and you're there experiencing it. Right. So I think this is kind of like where we're talking about like that, building that real confidence. There's this part of you that might feel like, I don't know if I can. Like, I don't know if I'm good enough. I don't know if I can match up to what I'm supposed to do here.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think that, yeah, there's like, for me, I'm still going to say, I think that this is like a three kind of stage thing. You know, there's like this childhood, and then there's this adolescence, and then there's this like adulthood. Right. And yeah, that adolescence, has that arrogance. I won't say that the childhood one is arrogant. I suppose in a certain way you could see it that way, but I see it more as innocence, right? Like
I agree. I agree with that. Yeah.
It's innocent. It's not trying to be anything. It's just completely innocent. And then there's this adolescence where it's like, oh, okay, no, like there's like there can be pushback, but then there's this kind of overcompensation, right? And that's where I think that arrogance, because when I think of arrogance, it's like, well, what is that, right? Where does that come from? And to me, I go, it's like, well, that comes from this illusion of control, right? And that can be like, you think that you actually have it all sort of within grasp, or, you know, and part of that equation might be you have to willfully just avoid certain things, ignore certain things in order to keep that illusion of control going. But as long as you maintain that illusion of control, you can feel kind of confident. But I feel like underneath that is actually someone who's really afraid, right? Because that's one of the things with control, is that control just comes along with fear.
Okay, I agree with you. I agree with you. And when I mentioned that it was kind of arrogant as a kid, in looking at the way you're looking at it now, you're not really arrogant as a kid. You're very innocent because fear hasn't even entered the equation. I think the adolescent point is all about the fear. And the inability to master the fear is the adolescent period. And so you try to do it in this faux confidence way of arrogance, but like true confidence, which we're trying to like aspire towards here, is mastery of fear. I think that's what it is. I think it's mastery of fear and the ability to not shy away from the potential pain that you might experience. You know?
I don't think it's the absence of fear, and I don't think that that's
not the absence
either.
of it.
Yeah, it's not the absence of fear, but it is a kind of reconciling of the fear. But the
that's a great way.
Stage is definitely like there is a little bit of fear has crept in, and so when you're sort of still younger, like it's like you're full of sort of a kind of energy and vitality, and you might even have a real seeming confidence about yourself, but there's still I think an element of innocence that you still got with you, because it's like, okay, you think that you've seen it all, you think that you've figured out, it's like, okay, you know what, I read probably, but now I got it, and then it's just like, oh no, now you start to realize that you actually don't have the control that you think that you do. You don't actually control all of these things. That there are things that you haven't thought of that can spring up and challenge you. That can, like your friend who is the football player, right? Like you think you're there until suddenly, boom, it's like, oh shit, these guys are like, almost all of them are better than me in a lot of other areas, in all of these different areas, right? And so to me, that takes us into the adulthood of confidence, right? Like, so, and it's in that, okay, so how do we respond to this? And for me, that's the, getting to where I think this kind of real confidence comes from is not in the ability to control, because it isn't. Control does not bring confidence. Control just brings more things that you have to control, right? Because you'll constantly, there's new things springing up, right? Oh, new, like all the stuff that you didn't know about, these new sort of quote unquote threats or whatever it is. It's kind of how the ego perceives it. It's like, oh, it's a threat. Now I have to figure out a way to control that. And now I have to figure out how to control this and control. And now you've got to control this increasing list of things that's piling up in order to maintain this sort of, again, illusion, this sort of confidence, I guess. And it's not sustainable. It's completely not sustainable. And that's, very much a story that's as old as, as time itself. No, not as time itself, but like as long as human beings have been around, we've told these stories of, people who, essentially people with power, and particularly people who become abusive of power. And like the story is like, it's exactly that. You get bigger and bigger and bigger, and you've got to control of these things. And there's a person who betrays you, or a bigger fish comes along, or a this or a that, and boom, 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 and ends in tragedy, typically. Where there's kind of that coming to face the reality that you don't have that control. You don't have, with as much power as you had, the resources, whatever, you can't. Mm-hmm. It's impossible. And so with that kind of knowledge, there's this, I think that's where there's this kind of wisdom that comes from it. It's like, okay, so if we don't have control, then how can we possibly have confidence in anything? Where do we actually get confidence if we can't be confident in what's going on around us to stay the same? Because it won't. Nothing around us will stay the same. Mm-hmm. Life is constant change. So how do we find real confidence in that? And for me, we build trust in ourselves, in our ability to respond to what happens, to all of the unexpected things that can happen. Instead of trying to control, we learn to respond more fully, more presently, as actively as possible. I think that's where this is, somewhere in that ballpark.
So the show that I did when I was younger was about soldiers, and there was a lot to do with being a soldier and what it meant to be a soldier. And as I was learning about soldiers, one thing I learned is like when you're an elite soldier, particularly like these elite soldiers, doesn't matter really what country, but like all the countries, they really generally do the same things. They put these guys and these girls, they put them through these rigorous tests, and they're brutal. Like a regular civilian person has no idea. You have no idea what these people go through to be able to do what they do. And like live fire, explosions going off, you're in cold water, you haven't slept for days, and you're run through these tests. And a lot of people, they fail them out, right? Like if you're trying to be a Navy SEAL, for example, or Spetsnaz or something like that, there's these things, and they're designed to basically what most people go, there's no possible way that I can do this. I can't. I'll freeze to death. I'll die. I'll drown. I'll whatever. And they put these soldiers through these tests. And what happens is the people who pass through it, they have a belief in themselves afterwards that they can do things that they never thought they could do before, but it's really tested. Like it's tested as though it's real. The simulation is so real that it basically prepares you for, being in that situation. And hopefully you never really are. But what happens is like, I think it's called Hell Week or something like that for the American Army. But most people don't get through it. But like when you come through the other side of that, you're going to have confidence because you're going to know that you're capable of doing things that you just never knew, and it was never tested. And so like growing into real confidence, not to say that everybody should be run through the same confidence tests, but when you begin to realize, like, I went through something really difficult, I hope I never go through it again. I never want to go through it again, but I survived it. And now I know I can make it through. And if you know you can make it through, there's like a real confidence there. And if you had to be creative in your response to what you would do and how you would solve that problem and how you would show up, you begin to build confidence in other areas, because like you do one thing and confidence is transcendent into other areas. And you start to go, well, if I could do it in this area, I could probably do it in that area. And so, I do think that there's realms of confidence as well. I think there's the physical, which is a very clear and obvious one, but there's the mental, just the ability to keep your mind solid, and then there's the spiritual, and then there's the emotional. And I think that there's these areas of confidence that we can build. And I think that confidence is one of those things, as we're going through this and as I'm saying this out loud, I'm realizing that like part of confidence is also knowing where you're not sure. It's like, okay, I've never been tested here. I don't know what I can do. I don't know if I'm solid in this or good or whatever. I have these skills over here and I assume that I could maybe apply them over here, but I won't really know until I get there. But there's a kind of confidence in that because it's a self-awareness, right? It's like there's that saying, if you know what you know, you're in control. If you don't know what you don't know, you're out of control. And I do think that control has a lot to do with this, but not control in the way that I think most of us think about it. I think it's control in that I know that I don't know this. And I know that there's these whole bunch of things that could happen. And I don't even know what those things are. But if you know that and you can go into it, your confidence in the sense that you're open to responding. And I think it's when you think you're in control and you think you can predict and know what's going to happen, when you can't, that's when you're going to get your confidence rattled. That's when you're going to find out you're shaky. And when you haven't made peace, because you said something else, and I think this is a really good word. It was like it wasn't you made peace, but it's like you've accepted or you
I think reconciled.
You reconciled. Yeah. So I think this is the thing is part of true confidence is reconciling with the fact that we're out of control a lot of the time. And just being okay with that and coming to peace with the fact that, look, like there's a certain amount that I control and there's a certain amount that I don't control. And sometimes I control very little. Sometimes I control quite a bit. But when you know that there's a certain amount you don't control, it makes you go into it without this innocence or arrogance, because you're like, hey, I know I don't control this. This could totally go the other way. I'm going to go in with good faith that hopefully it'll go the way I want, but I'm going in knowing that it could go the other way. And if it goes the other way, then I'll deal with it. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a confidence in that because you're going in recognizing the risk, but doing it like it's almost mindful. And I think with the more arrogant person, they're denying the reality that they're not as in control as they think they are. And that's where they end up kind of eating it, right? That's where they end up falling on their face.
Oh yeah, and you eat it harder the more arrogance you have. Hey everybody, this is Evan, and this episode is brought to you by my book. Yes, I recently released a book called The Actor's Awakening: Connecting Spirituality to Craft. Expand yourself as an actor and your craft through a spiritual perspective. Take a journey that will explore universal philosophies and insights to help you understand human nature in a profound way and develop practices to take your work to another level. Again, that's The Actor's Awakening, Connecting Spirituality to Craft, available on Kindle and paperback on Amazon. And as always, if you like the show, please subscribe. Right? Because
I agree. Yeah.
It's like you've
Pride comes before the fall.
yeah, exactly. That's precisely the situation, right? And then it hurts all the harder, and your your ego gets just more bruised from the whole thing, and it makes it even more painful, and it makes it even harder to get yourself back up and to go back into something, right? Because you might, maybe you were arrogant about something, but maybe you were actually still really passionate about that thing. That was genuine, but there was something that was going on within that was creating this whole fiction around you and you doing this, whatever it is that you're doing. There's so many things in what you said. I feel like that's just been this conversation so far. It's like there's so many things that you've said.
A lot of territory to cover. That's the thing.
Right? One thing that stuck out to me, you're talking about like the Navy SEALs. I've heard this rule that apparently the Navy SEALs have, which is when you think you're done, we think you've hit your limit. They sort of have a general rule in the SEALs that's like you're only at 40%. So that first moment where it strikes you, we're like, right. I can't, I'm finished. They're like, you've only hit 40%. Like you can keep going. But a lot of that stuff, and this isn't, it's a very, the whole like being special forces training, like it's a very sort of dramatic example of this thing. So it works well, but there's so many ways in which this kind of thing operates in our life. But the thing that strikes me about that is that it's all about discomfort, right? Like all of these things, it's just like you are putting yourself through discomfort, and to a certain extent, these people have willingly decided that they're going to do it. They know going into it that it's like, this is going to be uncomfortable. This isn't going to be a fucking day on the beach. This is going to be tough. There's literally a hell week in which I'm going to be exhausted. I'm going to be cold. I'm going to be, all of these things are going to be going on, and it's going to push me to my limit. But the thing that I think is that, like, the sort of the wisdom, the intelligence behind it is that you get on the other side of it is that that you can do that. You know that you can be faced with high degrees of discomfort and move through it. And I would ask everybody, it's like in your life, there are so many things that every single human being has made it through, uncomfortable things, devastating things, very tough things that every single person has been through, and you've done it. You've done it. Think of it. If you're hearing this right now, congratulations, you're a champion. Right? Like it's you've gone through some shit, almost certainly. You've made it through. So you do have some capacity in you. You do have this capacity in you. And I think that's one of the things about the human story is that, one of the biggest things in the human story is that we are more capable than we think we are. Right? We can be confronted with the toughest of situations, and we will find a way through it. And we often avoid situations until we have no choice. But when we have no choice, it's pretty remarkable what we're capable of, right? We can dig down and find that we are stronger, more resilient, more that there's just more than we thought that we were. And I think that that's a place where we can we can reflect on those moments, and we can draw upon those moments to give us strength, to be like, hey, look at what I've actually already been through. Mm-hmm. So why would I think that that isn't going to be the case going forward. You know, there's enough, most of us should be able to put it together enough of an evidence list for ourselves to be like, oh yeah, look, I have all of this evidence that I rise to the challenge when I need to rise to the challenge. Right. And that's something that I think we can build trust on within ourselves is simply through that recognition of what we've already been through and what we've already experienced. Right. And that, we don't necessarily need to shy away from life, because I think that that's such a tragedy, right? Is when we shy away from life, because I think that's, coming through that adolescent phase, right? Where, yeah, maybe there was this arrogance and you hit the ground pretty hard and there wasn't a recovery from that, right? Or the way that we didn't respond to it as graciously as possible. Because, like, don't get me wrong, sometimes we just kind of make it through a situation. Sometimes, like, we don't handle it as gracefully as we would like. But regardless, sometimes you win them dirty, right?
Yeah,
but
totally.
And that's okay too. That's a whole other experience. That's a whole other skill that you can add to your repertoire. It's just like, sometimes it's not pretty, but I can muck it up. But, I think that, through that kind of confidence that we can build through trusting ourselves to be able to respond to whatever arises, we can become more graceful in how we are able to respond to things that arise in the future.
Yeah, this idea too of like winning it dirty, I think is a good thing to like hang on for a second, because there's a lot of times where you're going to get through stuff and it's not going to be graceful. And I think that, I don't know, like, definitely something I learned from playing hockey is like, yeah, sometimes you just win it dirty. Like sometimes you just grind and you fight and you get a rebound, and it's just, and that's so much about what it is. And you sometimes it's just about staying in the fight of whatever, metaphor you want to use that for, but like stay in the thing, because your chance might just show up, and you're way outmatched, you're way outnumbered. It's like everything's against you. It's like you're designed to lose in this situation. And that willingness to like hang in there, that willingness to just kind of keep going in spite of that. There's something that's really great about that, because yeah, you can come out the winner, but also when you're down, your ability to keep fighting, you're going to build a kind of confidence in that as well. Because like, I don't know, like when I was younger, I mean, I like one of the first couple teams I played for in football, like soccer, was winning teams. We just won all the time. It's win, 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 win. It's great. It was awesome. But then I played for teams for a few years after that were like losing teams. And it was always a struggle and we were fighting and it was a battle. And in those teams where I played, where we had to kind of keep fighting, I had to learn a lot, because there's something about a team that has heart and doesn't give up, just like there's a person, right? And if it's I think so much of this too is a mental game. It's like you need to not believe you've lost. You need to look at it in terms of, like, if you're 3 goals down, I don't know, I'm just gonna use sports. You're 3 goals down, whatever you want to use, but it's like, we got to get 1 goal. That's all we got to get right now. We don't have to get 3 goals yet. We got to get 1 goal. And then we got 1 goal. Now we got to get another goal. And then all of a sudden, you've tied the game. And all of a sudden, you're in overtime and you won the game. And that's what it's like. it's just, and I like that feeling. I just despise being down. Like I don't like it when sports, like I hate being down. I just, but one thing I learned about it is like when you get a few goals down, you can start to think, oh, we've lost. And you have to mentally decide, all we got to do is get a goal. That's what we got to do right now. We got to get a goal. And then you get a goal, and then you start to believe you can get another goal. And like I've had comebacks in games, and like just moments where I've playing soccer, and you're like at the 30 yards out, and you just you get the ball and you just crack it, and all of a sudden it goes in the net, and like no one, not even you, thought it was going to go in, and you're just like, holy shit, we're in this. Like this is happening. You know what I mean? And it's just about so much of it is just about just stay in the pocket. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to do sometimes. I mean, it's such a mental game when it comes to confidence, where you can just get in your head and start to believe that it's unwinnable. You've lost, you've failed, whatever you're telling yourself. And you have to, something I keep reminding myself of is like, this is the middle of the story. No matter what's happening right now, this is the middle. I'm in the middle. I'm not at the end. And the only time my mental game starts to fail is when I start to think I'm at the end of something and it's not working out. But if it's ever not working out, I really have trained myself, and I try to remind myself, this is the middle, because there's no way that it ends here. Like, and if it does end here, like I'm going to go out swinging. I'm going to go out that way. And there's kind of there is a confidence in the fact that when you believe it's the middle, you're a different type of player, performer, person, whatever you want to put it, right? So I think there's something about that in real confidence, where it's just, it's a lot to do with what story are you telling?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because
for sure.
Because like we've talked a lot about this adolescent stage. We've talked a lot about the arrogance part of it. But I think that third stage of it, this is the kind of the gold, right? Is like true confidence to me is that ability to not let your mind defeat you, and not let your body defeat you, and not let these emotions defeat you. Like I had a trainer when I was training for this, doing the show, and his whole thing was like, he was a soldier, and he's like, look, you can give up when your mind wants to give up, or you can give up when your body wants to give up. And your body's going to want to give up. Your mind's going to tell you that your body's not ready. And if you work with me and you'll give up when your body actually gives up, you're going to find out like incredible things. And I just did it with him. And he's like, you're the only person. He was like, you're the only person I've worked with that actually has done it. But I would do push-ups until I just literally couldn't do any. And he'd be there and he'd be pushing me. And I couldn't physically do it anymore, but I'd keep trying. And the amount of confidence that built inside of me was incredible, because it was, my mind would be like, I can't do anymore. It hurts too much. It'd just tell you all this story. And then he and I just had this thing. Okay, one more. 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 And all of a sudden you've done 20 more, but it's just one more. Just do one more. And that's so much what confidence is to me now. It's like, just one more. That's all you got to do right now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not some grand, burst out onto the stage. It's these small little things that you work towards. Yeah, it's I think that a lot of us think of these things in big grand gestures, but it's like, no, it's like building that confidence a little bit, like every single day, like one little thing. But it still requires that element of a little bit of discomfort, like there's still like, it's still, there's still there, it's, you don't learn to trust yourself and your ability to respond by just being safe all the time, because like being safe is what you're essentially closing yourself off, right? you're hiding yourself away, and you know, life I believe wants us out in it, you know, and participating and involved and creating and stuff like that. I mean, you know, as artists, I hope that that's part of what we're doing, right? Like an engagement, you know, to be engaged with life is to I think deal with a certain level of uncomfortableness, I suppose.
Yeah.
So,
well,
but it doesn't have to be like something crazy, you know, like
No.
it's you start, I think it has to start small, because otherwise it's like you said, you know, it's like we just got to get one goal, right? Or let's just work trying to get one goal, just the next one. Forget about trying to win this game, just one goal, right? Like what's the thing right in front of you? Which again, I think that there's all these little places where we see this sort of wisdom pop up, where it's just like, just get focused on right now, responding to what's happening right now, right in front of you, right? Because that actually gives you the best opportunity. That is actually gives you the greatest opportunity to succeed, is through that. Just respond to what is happening right now, as opposed to getting too caught up with all of these other things. Just get present, get here, and respond. And through that, you'll begin to build up that kind of confidence, because you'll start to see some things happening, right? Like, you know, as you're talking, like I definitely was thinking of hockey. That's usually the sport in which I'm I filter in terms of is definitely in sport, for sports at least. And yeah, it's like we just got to get that next goal, get back in the game. And you can see that happen. So you winning these little battles, and yeah, and sometimes it's ugly. It's not pretty. It's like, and there's the whole expression in hockey of garbage goals.
Yeah, the garbage
right?
goal. Yeah.
The garbage goal, right? Just picking up the mess that was left, you know, just like everybody just like loads up to the net, put a shot in there, hopefully like something bounces out, everyone's whacking in for it, everyone's just, you know, beating the shit out of each other out there. But, you know, it's like the great teams know how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the great teams know how to do them pretty, but they also know how to do them dirty if they need to, right? But it all still is in response to what is required of the moment, because that really is always the only thing that can be done.
Mm-hmm.
Like it literally is the only thing that can be done is the thing that's right in front of you. Everything else is just a bullshit story.
Yeah. And that's important to remember. I mean, you know, I think if you're thinking too far in the future and it's making you feel overwhelmed, then you need to stop doing that. You know, anything like, and when it comes to confidence, it's like you got to manage it, I think, because story can empower you or it can defeat you. And, you know, story is always just a matter of focus, filtering, and patterning. And what I mean by that is like, if all you have to do, if all you have to do is score a goal and that's your focus, then your story is simple and it's clear and it's easy. But if your focus is we have to score 3 goals to win, then that becomes a more complex story. It becomes a bigger story. It becomes whatever. And if that bigger story is not really serving you in the moment, you need to be focused on the smaller story. And that's where, like, you know, filtering it and in some ways framing it. The other thing too is like framing it, you know, I would say if you're playing a sport and you go, oh man, we've been getting outshot, we've been getting outplayed, we've been doing this, and this is what's been happening all game. Change your frame. Make your frame what's happened in the last 30 seconds. In the last 30 seconds, everything was done perfect. And then the next 30 seconds, everything was done perfect. And don't make your frame so big. Don't make it the whole game. Make it these moments that you're playing right now, because all of a sudden you can just turn everything around. And then, you know, like patterning is interesting too, because you can focus on where the pattern has gone wrong, or you can focus on where the pattern has gone right. Oh, I fucked this up. I messed that up. We screwed this up, da 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 da. And that's going to tell you a story based on a bunch of things that went wrong. But you could go, you know what? When I was 12, I did this. And then when I was 15, I did that. And you know what? Earlier in this game, I did this. And you know what? There's no reason why right now I couldn't do it. You know what I mean? And so you pattern in almost seemingly random things you're pulling together, but they're all real. They all happened. They all matter. And you bring them into that moment. And now all of a sudden your pattern is built on success and you feel good, and that brings confidence, right? And so it's like you gotta be disciplined mentally. You have to be able to put your mind on the right things and your heart in the right place. And it doesn't matter if you, like, 9 out of 10 things you mess up in your life. If there's one thing you succeeded at some point, put that in the pattern, put that in the frame, put that in the filter. And there's something else you did right over here, put that in the frame, put that in the filter, bring it all in, add it all up. Because there's a bunch of shit you probably did right at some point in your life if you add it all up.
I would say probably more things.
Yeah. More things than you even recognize, and most you don't appreciate as well, I would bet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's that. You may have seen this. A lot of people might have seen this, but it's like a story, whether it's true or not. I think it's a true story, but this, like a grade school teacher, like on the first day of class or something like that, did like wrote like a bunch of, like, this part of the thing that writes a bunch of like math equations up on the board, and there's like 10 of them, and one of them is wrong, like and it's all intentionally like done, and the kids pretty much always like point out like, you got one wrong, blah 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 blah, right? And it was and he says like, yes, I did get one wrong. He's like, but 9 of them were correct, right? And just know that, like, and basically just trying to point out this whole thing of like, in life, like, you will do a lot of things right, but you and other people will very often focus on the one thing that was wrong. Mm-hmm. And look, it's not say like, yeah, sure, like, learn, correct that mistake, but don't forget the 9 out of 10 things that you're doing right. Mm-hmm. I think that's always a good lesson.
Yeah, it's a good reminder.
Yeah.
Well, look, I mean, there's lots of stuff to talk about in this area, but I figure, we've explored some good territory. And let's just share a beer and then we'll wrap this baby up.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
I'll go first.
You want to go first?
Yeah, let me go first.
All right.
Okay, I'm having, this is from Silver Valley Brewing Company, and it's called The Lion. And it's a ESB, which is extra special bitter. And I can tell you something about this. It is a weirdly powerful beer. I got like a little 4-pack of this week, and I had a few like earlier, and every time I've had one of these beers, I've been like, man, this thing feels like it hits me way harder than everything else. It's not like that high in alcohol. It's like 5.5%, but it just, I don't know. It just feels strong. It's a tasty beer, really tasty. It's a nice drinker. It's like, definitely if you like that kind of bitter taste, it's good, which I enjoy sometimes. So that's why I got it, but really cool artwork on the can, and yeah, good beer. So that's what I'm having.
Nice. I'm drinking a Vienna Amber Lager from Moody Ales and Co. and Company. That's really good. Yeah. I don't know what else to say. It's really great.
Really great.
Very tasty, easy to drink. Very tasty. All right. Well, wrapping this one up, conversation on confidence and growing into it. This was kind of just, for me, an interesting exploration. I don't know if I've ever really dove into the topic issue, challenge, whatever you want to call it, of confidence like this before. And it was very interesting to kind of look at it in these sort of phases that we go through, because I think that it's interesting. It seems to kind of line up with this other thing that we've talked about on the show before, like in the artist's type of journey, where very often there's this place of innocence where it all starts from. Right. And then you start to go really into it and learning all of this technique and like all of this stuff related to your craft of what you're doing. And then it usually has to go into a third phase where you have to let that all go. Right. Like it's almost like a partial returning to innocence, but now you're equipped with all of these, all of these new things. But there's this sort of journey that seems to kind of go along with this confidence thing, there's like this innocence, but then I'm learning the craft, and sometimes, and I can attest to this from my own life and story for, like as an actor, which is like, to my confidence, because I had this confidence when I was younger as an actor, and it did a lot for me. It opened some doors for me. It gave me a lot of opportunities, because confidence can do a lot for you. But in many ways it hadn't been tested. It hadn't been challenged. Like I'd been up to a certain point, I had nothing but like people just being like, please do this. Here's all the opportunities. Like whether it was through my school or whatever, it was just like do this stuff. You're awesome. You're amazing. Like da 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 da. Like it was just, I was just sort of the best in the groups that I was in at the time. And then suddenly the world opens up a little bit, and it was like, whoa, shit, I need to learn some stuff, right? Because there's people who are better than me, and I want to be better. And there can be, there were some challenges there. Like confidence takes some hits, particularly it's tough within the arts and something that you're passionate about, because criticism can be tough, and it just, I know I just started to feel like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. Like I don't even know if I can do this thing. Like was I ever any good? Like, was there anything at all to what I was doing? And there was a rebuilding process that I had to go through there, in terms of finding some confidence and trust in myself again. But yeah, it's in many ways part of this journey where it's like, okay, now you've learned some stuff, and it might have shaken your confidence because it just opened you up to this whole world of all the shit that you didn't know about. And you've got to try and word of the day, reconcile that, and find a way to move forward. And eventually growing into a more organic, real confidence that comes out of a place of trust, where it's like you've got all of this stuff now. You're no longer ignorant to a lot of things. I'm just rambling at this point. So I think that the last thing I'll just iterate for people is confidence and trust in ourselves, because I think that's those are one and the same thing, which is something that was kind of, I've never really thought of before. Is like, oh, confidence. Am I confident? It's like, well, what is confidence? It's my ability to trust myself. Mm-hmm. It's ability to trust myself, which is interesting because our last podcast that we did, going through our lists of questions that we always ask our guests, which is a great podcast, everybody. Definitely check it out. But one of the questions is, what would you tell your childhood self? Right. And my thing was like, trust yourself, right? Trust yourself. And I think that's huge. And it doesn't mean you're not going to make mistakes. Doesn't mean that you're not going to be wrong, but trust your ability to respond to that. Trust that you can rise to the occasion of that. Trust that you can look at the thing that you could have, that, maybe you totally fucked it up, or maybe it could have just been done better, to varying degrees, but trust that you can respond to it and and the only way to do that is really with humility. You can't do it with arrogance. You got to do it with humility. Because when you come from a place of humility, you don't come down quite as hard. You don't land as hard from when those little mistakes or those bumps in the road come along. You can transmute it. You can make something great out of it and say like, okay, I could have done that better. You take your lessons and you move forward now a little bit wiser. And that is actually just another thing. Instead of something to destroy your confidence, you can use it as something to build your confidence, because now you've just shown to yourself that you have the ability to learn. Now you have the ability to take the things that kind of throw you off for a bit, and you can make something great out of it. You can make yourself better out of it. So it is so much about the story that we're telling in these situations. So and again, know that you're doing more things right than you're doing wrong, and know that you've already in your life encountered so many things that you have responded to, made it through, figured out, in very challenging situations. So you have plenty of good reason to why you should be able to trust yourself.
I agree with that. I think that's important to keep in mind. It's so easy to look at what's going wrong and get yourself into a defeated state where you're seeing things that aren't serving you, and I think it's, in the world of personal development, which I think a lot of us are focused on these days. A lot of us are interested in. There's a big market obviously for it. Personal growth is like, it's important to look at where you can improve and figure out, okay, well, I could get better here, I could do that. But like, to even get to the place where you could improve that, think about how much you did right to get there. You know what I mean? Like, there's so many pieces that you put together that were done so well before you got to this point of this thing you're trying to improve upon. I mean, I think in a weird way, like, this has definitely happened for me, and I'm sure other people can relate to this, but I think with personal growth, sometimes we look at ourselves like, I'm a mess and I need to fix that. Whereas it's like, no, you're actually there's a lot of things you're doing really well. Like, you're actually doing a lot of stuff well. And I think it's really important to appreciate some of these little things that you might forget about. Like, do you know how to speak a language? If you know how to speak a language, I mean, that's a really important skill to have. Some people don't have that skill. You have that skill, right? Can you walk? People don't appreciate that. Like, most people don't appreciate that at all. There's people in the world that can't walk. Imagine if you couldn't walk. Imagine how much that would affect your life, right? If you could walk right now and you can't. Or imagine there's something that you imagine you had to eat out of a straw. You couldn't even chew food. Some people are there. You have no idea. Like, there's all these things that right now you have that are working, that they're good, that you're not appreciating, right? And so, there's a story I heard once, like, from a guy. He had like no legs, and it was something like someone said something like it must be hard to live with no legs, and then they responded something like, it must be hard to live with legs and like not use them. You know what I mean? Like, but it's like this whole idea. I mean, the point is that I think confidence doesn't have to be built on these magic, amazing, incredible things all the time. It can be built on very small, fundamental stuff. And you can start to go like, okay, I got this working for me. I got that working for me. You got a lot working for you probably, and focus on all the things you got working for you. And then focus on that one goal thing. What's the one thing that I'm going to add to the build of who I am? And don't compare yourself to all these other people out there who maybe they look like they're doing way better than you are, because they're at a different place in their journey. And that's not what's important. It's like when you compare yourself, it's like you're playing a sport and you feel like you're losing, right? So focus on your journey and focus on what you're building and what you're, and that's where true confidence exists for me. I think it becomes I need to build from where I'm at, not where I want to be, where I wish I was, or I wish I wasn't, or something like that. This is where I'm at. This is what I'm doing. This is how I'm improving. This is where I'm going, and I'm going to focus on taking that step and then that next step and that next step. And one last thing I'll just say as we finish this baby off, I always saw confidence and trust as this synonymous thing. And I've mentioned that on the podcast before, but you know what? I think I've walked away a little bit with this episode. What's really kind of dawned on me is that I think I used to look at confidence and trust as trusting my environment as opposed to trusting myself. And I think where I would say, what I've kind of had an insight about is that confidence is trust in myself far more, like 90% and maybe 10% in my environment. Because I used to always think of it in this example, like I can't sprint if I think the ground's going to fall out from under me. But what I think I'm walking away from it now is going, traversing this land, it might be rocky and bumpy and unstable. Confidence is my ability to navigate it and learn it and figure it out, because I'll be able to respond to it, whatever it is. And I used to look at confidence more as it was more dependent on the environment being safe and okay. And I think I'm changing my opinion and my perception on that walking away from this podcast. So if there's anyone out there and you're trying to build true confidence in your life as well, I hope you'll take that and maybe run with it.
Thank you for listening in on our conversation today. We hope you found something helpful that you can carry forward with you. Head over to our website, wayoftheartist.com, for more free exclusive material and learn about the show. If you haven't already, please support us by subscribing to the show, sharing it with people you know, and keeping compassionate, creative conversation going.